The night the monitors began to scream was one of those nights that seemed to split time in half, before and after, life and whatever came next. The sterile hum of the hospital, the fluorescent lights that refused to dim, the smell of antiseptic and fear, it all pressed down on Bill Spencer's chest until he couldn't breathe. Katie lay motionless beneath the white sheets, her skin pale, her heartbeat slowing into the fragile rhythm of surrender. The doctors had warned him for weeks that her condition was worsening, that her heart was failing, that even the best medication couldn't hold back the inevitable. But Bill, a man who had fought and won against the world, couldn't accept defeat, not from fate, not from God, not from the fragile machinery of the human body. He stood at her bedside gripping her hand, whispering words she couldn't hear, and swore he would not let her die. Somewhere else in Los Angeles, a siren wailed through the night. The news came in fragments, crackling through the police scanner like the beginning of a nightmare. Escaped inmate, car crash, unknown status. Luna Nozawa's name flickered across the hospital television hours later, her mugshot appearing beneath the headline "Prison Escape Ends in Tragedy." For most people, it was just another story, another lost soul swallowed by her own recklessness. But for Bill, the timing felt cruelly deliberate, like the universe was offering him a cruel exchange. Because that same night, the surgeon on duty approached him with news that sounded like salvation. There had been a heart donation, a match, arriving within the hour. The words hit him like lightning and left him numb. A donor heart, a perfect match for Katie, arriving just as she was slipping away. The doctor's voice carried a tone of cautious relief, the kind that tried to be comforting while hiding its own disbelief. "It's a miracle," he said. But Bill had stopped believing in miracles long ago. He had learned that every gift from heaven comes wrapped in a debt no one wants to pay. And as he signed the consent forms with trembling hands, something in his chest told him this was not coincidence. It was an exchange. Life for life. The surgery began before dawn. Bill waited in the corridor, pacing like a trapped animal, his mind flickering between prayer and dread. He remembered every version of Katie he had ever known, the fierce woman who loved him despite his arrogance, the mother who softened every room she entered, the survivor who had already defied death once before. He couldn't lose her again. But when the surgeon emerged, the relief in his eyes didn't erase the unease in Bill's heart. "The procedure went well," the doctor said. "Her body accepted the heart." Bill nodded, but a question gnawed at him. "Whose heart?" The answer came in whispers, overheard between nurses. "A young woman, deceased on arrival after an accident near the coast. Name classified for privacy." But Bill had seen the news, Luna's escape, the car overturned, the footage of a stretcher covered in a white sheet. His stomach twisted as realization crept in. Could it be her? Could the heart now beating inside Katie's chest belong to Luna Nozawa, the woman whose name had become synonymous with scandal, obsession, and destruction? He tried to dismiss the thought. The doctors had said the donor's identity would remain confidential. But guilt has a way of filling in the blanks. And so, as Katie began to recover, her color returning, her voice trembling back to life, Bill found himself unable to meet her gaze without hearing the echo of another heartbeat beneath it. The sound was steady, strong, young. Too young. He told himself it didn't matter, that life was life, that no one could blame him for wanting to save the woman he loved. But deep down, he knew. Love built on another person's death carries a shadow that no light can erase. For weeks, Katie's recovery was hailed as miraculous. She smiled again, walked again, even laughed again. But at night, the shadows returned. She began to dream, dreams that felt too vivid, too real to dismiss. She saw flashes of metal and glass, the screech of tires, a woman's voice screaming in the dark. She woke in cold sweats, her hand clutching at her chest as if trying to silence the heart that wasn't hers. Bill would hold her until the shaking stopped, whispering that it was just a nightmare. But the more he said it, the less he believed it himself. Then came the baby. In her dreams, Katie began to see a child, a small, faceless infant crying somewhere beyond reach. At first, she thought it was a trick of her subconscious, some ghost of maternal instinct or buried memory. But the dreams grew stronger, more insistent. She heard Luna's name whispered through them, like whined through broken glass. The visions began to bleed into her waking life. She'd catch herself humming lullabies she didn't know, craving foods she had never liked, weeping for reasons she couldn't explain. The doctors called it post-surgical stress, a psychological echo of trauma. But Katie knew better. The heart beating inside her wasn't silent. It remembered. Bill watched her unravel and felt his own sanity slipping. He tried to convince himself it was all coincidence, that Luna's death and Katie's transplant were two separate tragedies colliding by chance. But every time he saw her hand rest over her chest, every time she murmured the name Luna in her sleep, the weight of what he had done pressed harder against his ribs. He began researching the case himself, using his resources to dig into hospital records, coroner's reports, anything that could confirm or deny the truth. What he found made his blood run cold. The records were inconsistent. No formal identification had been made at the crash site. The body was listed as female, approximately mid-20s, with no family verification. The paperwork was rushed, the transfer immediate. Someone had pushed the transplant through faster than protocol allowed. And buried deep in the chain of signatures, Bill found a name he recognized, a doctor with ties to an underground organ network that had been under investigation months earlier. He confronted the surgeon who had performed Katie's operation, demanding answers. The man paled, stammered something about confidentiality, and refused to speak further. That was when Bill knew. It wasn't Luna's death that had saved Katie, it was her disappearance. Someone had taken advantage of Luna's chaos, her criminal past, and her escape, to use her as a ghost. The perfect cover for a crime. Weeks turned into months. Katie grew stronger physically, but more fragile mentally. The nightmares didn't fade, they deepened. She began writing down details from them. The sound of waves, the smell of salt, the face of a man she couldn't place. Sometimes, she spoke in fragments of sentences that weren't hers. "They took me from the water," she whispered one night, her eyes half open, voice distant. "They said I'd help someone live." Bill froze, realizing she wasn't dreaming. Something within her was speaking through her. The guilt consumed him. He had built empires, destroyed rivals, commanded armies of lawyers and tycoons, but now he was powerless against the ghost of a woman whose name he might have inadvertently signed away. He wanted to tell Katie, but how could he? How do you tell the person you love that the heart beating in her chest might have been stolen from another woman, perhaps even one still alive? He carried the truth like a wound, festering and unspoken. And then one morning the news broke. A report from an independent journalist investigating human trafficking in California revealed the existence of a black market organ ring operating under the guise of medical charity. Among the names listed as victims was Luna Nozawa. The report claimed she had not died in the crash, but been abducted afterward, her identity erased, her organs catalogued for sale. The death had been staged to cover the crime. Bill's world tilted on its axis. Luna wasn't dead. The heart inside Katie's body wasn't hers. Not completely, not legally, not morally. It was the product of a system built on exploitation. The woman whose life he thought had ended had been stripped of everything but her identity, sold to save the woman he loved. He felt sick, hollowed out by the irony of it all. In saving one heart, he had damned another. When Katie learned the truth, she didn't speak for days. She sat by the window, her hand pressed against her chest as though trying to feel the weight of it. The guilt was unbearable. Every beat of her heart now sounded like theft. She began to withdraw from everyone, Bill, her family, even her doctors. The nightmares returned, sharper than ever. In them, Luna stood at the edge of the ocean, her hair wet, her eyes burning with accusation. "You're living my life," she said. "Give it back." Bill tried to hold her, but Katie pulled away. "You think you saved me," she said one night, her voice shaking. "But you didn't." You just changed the name of the ghost that haunts us. He wanted to argue, to tell her that none of this was her fault, that the blame belonged to the monsters who had orchestrated the crime. But the truth was crueler. He had accepted the transplant without question. He had looked the other way because he couldn't face losing her. That was his sin, and no confession could cleanse it. When Luna finally resurfaced, it was not as a vengeful spirit, but as a survivor. She appeared at a press conference months later, her face pale but unbroken, telling the story of her abduction. How she had been kept in an underground clinic, how her identity had been used to facilitate illegal donations, how she had watched others disappear, never to return. Her testimony sent shockwaves through the city. Lawsuits followed, investigations reopened, hospitals audited. But for Bill and Katie, the damage was already done. The night Luna spoke on television, Katie sat alone in the living room, her pulse racing in rhythm with the words. "They told me my heart was taken," Luna said, her voice trembling. "But I'm still here." So whose heart was it? The question hung in the air like a curse. Katie felt her chest tighten, not with physical pain, but with moral weight. She turned off the television, unable to bear the sound of her own heartbeat echoing against the silence. In the weeks that followed, Luna's recovery became a symbol of resilience. The world called her brave. But for Katie, her existence was unbearable proof that something inside her did not belong. She began visiting the hospital chapel at night, kneeling before the empty altar, whispering apologies to a woman she had never truly met. "If this heart is yours," she would say, "please forgive me for making it beat for me." Bill, watching her fade beneath the guilt, began to realize that redemption would not come through silence. He arranged to meet Luna in secret. When he saw her for the first time, alive, fragile, haunted, he could barely speak. "I didn't know," he said, his voice breaking. "I swear to you, I didn't know." Luna looked at him with something that wasn't anger, but something worse. Understanding. "None of you ever know," she said quietly. "You just want to believe someone else pays the price." When she left, Bill felt something in him collapse. He returned home and found Katie asleep, her hand over her chest, the rhythm of another woman's life beating beneath her skin. He realized then that there was no undoing what had been done. Some choices cannot be unmade. They can only be carried. Months later, as Katie stood at the edge of the same ocean where Luna had nearly died, the wind tugging at her hair, she whispered the question that had haunted her since that night in the hospital. "Whose life is this now?" The waves gave no answer, only the steady echo of her borrowed heartbeat beneath her ribs. Somewhere, miles away, Luna paused.